Well, anticipation has been very high over the last few days with expectations of an imminent announcement. There were celebrations in the hours and days, in fact, leading up to the announcement. But interestingly, when the announcement was actually made, the response was quite muted. So the celebrations that you see in the street are largely just before, when anticipation, as I say, was very high. When the announcement was actually made, I was sitting here with a number of my Palestinian colleagues, and the response was very bittersweet, I would say. Obviously, we welcome a ceasefire, and we really hope that this pause will last, will extend to being a lasting and meaningful peace for the Palestinian people. But it really marks the beginning and not the end for all of my staff here. We have 120 Palestinian staff, and of course, the vast majority of aid workers here in Gaza are Gazan. They too are affected. They have lost their homes. Many have lost family members. Nobody is not affected. And therefore, there are hopes of being able to return home. But I think reality may set in that for many, there are no homes to return to, and there are no families to reunite with. So it really is a welcome moment, a chance for a bit of breathing space for people. As one colleague said to me, the ceasefire will give us a chance to cry, because people haven't grieved, they haven't mourned the losses that have been inflicted by this awful bombardment. But it really does, it is the absolute bare minimum that we can and they should expect at this point.
Right. So how much aid, though, are you hoping will enter the territory as part of the ceasefire deal?
We absolutely hope that there will be a significant increase in the inflow of humanitarian aid. And we have consistently said for the last 15 months that a significant obstacle to that which we've been trying to achieve is the blockade on aid, which has been comprehensive and very knowing and clear violation of humanitarian law. It's an absolute prerequisite for us to be able to scale up and to respond effectively, that there is negotiation and agreement on border crossings and the inflow of aid. Without this, the extent to which we will be able to respond will continue to be dampened and hindered by the lack of humanitarian aid.
So you're in Khan Yunis in Gaza. Liz, how have people been coping there over the last 15 months, and in particular over the past recent months? How can you help people keep going yourself when conditions are so desperate?
Well, we've started using the phrase survival conditions instead of living conditions, because this is the basis upon which people are experiencing daily life. It's a case of trying to get through the day with the minimum risk possible, which is extremely hard to achieve. We've consistently said that nobody is safe and nobody is protected. And my job title is a bit of a misnomer, because I'm head of protection and we cannot protect people. But what we've been trying to do is minimize or mitigate the impact of some of the violations, the abuses that have been perpetrated, and the awful living or survival conditions people have been experiencing to the extent possible. I think it's also important to note that, as I said, the majority of the aid workforce here is Gazan, and so we've been trying to deliver aid to those in need, whilst the team themselves are also displaced, have lost family members, and are traumatized. So it has been extremely challenging and will continue to be so.
What medical help are you able to give people, Liz, in terms of treatment? What are you still able to do? And what are the main dangers people are facing there? Is it military action up until the ceasefire, or is it infection and disease?
In the last few months, I would say that people are not being killed as much by bombardment as they are by infectious disease and lack of access to medication, lack of access to be able to evacuate for further medical treatment outside of Gaza. And so when you say ceasefire, I think it's important to add that the ceasefire isn't in effect until Sunday. And throughout the announcement and throughout the night here and this morning, there has been bombardment and artillery fire and mortars that I can hear all around me. So the risks remain extremely present. The dangers in terms of delivery of medical assistance is that of largely Israeli military action. There is a process by which we notify the Israeli military of our movements, our presence in very acute detail. But this is a mitigation measure. It's not a prevention measure or a protection measure. So this is the main challenge for us. That said, we are operating medical points all over Gaza and supporting the national healthcare system with essential medication. We bring in emergency medical teams from outside who are able to perform specialized surgeries. And we've recently begun delivering mental health care, specialized mental health care, given that all psychiatric hospitals in Gaza have been destroyed. So we're able to try and integrate some mental health care for the vastly traumatized population into the national healthcare system.
And you say you can hear the sound of mortars right now?
Yeah, just before I came on air, there were mortars quite close by. It's become sadly very normal here. I still react to it as an outsider. My Gaza colleagues barely blink because unfortunately and tragically, this has become a normal part of life, which should never be normal for anybody, of course.
Well, you talked about survival conditions there. What is it like to be there in terms of getting food, finding shelter, because it's winter there, isn't it? What does Khan Yunis look like today? We've seen the scenes of utter devastation, and yet, you know, where are you now? Because you're there, we're talking to you, we have connection with you, and you're there with lights on and, you know, the curtain behind you. Where are you? What's it like outside?
We're in an extremely lucky situation, having the resources to be able to rent a building which has solar power. So at the moment, we're running on battery from the solar that we stored yesterday. The sun hasn't risen yet. We have access to water, although of course the water is heavily contaminated, so we have to filter it for domestic and drinking use. But I am surrounded by tens of thousands of tents. And it's an extremely uncomfortable reality to be living in a building, for one, with running water and some electricity, when the tens of thousands of people surrounding me are in very flimsy plastic tents. There has been flooding. There is no effective sewage system. Nobody has electricity. So when the sun goes down before 5 p.m., it's absolutely pitch black outside. And we have children everywhere. I think it's really important to note that there are no schools left in Gaza. So there's no education system. So kids are out on the street all the time. People fled with what they were standing in, so that people don't have clothing, appropriate clothing. Kids don't have shoes. And because of the extreme lack of access to food, for one, and other essential items, a very frequent sight, which is quite alarming, is the sight of children and young people wading through rubbish in their bare feet, trying to get scraps of food to eat. Again, there has been a significant restriction on the importation of food and the distribution of food, given the scale of need and the hindrance that has been imposed on the humanitarian services. So people are absolutely desperate. And you see things here every day that really floor you, really take your breath away. I think particularly, I've been in many conflict zones and in many situations in the Middle East and further afield of conflict and displacement, but I've never seen the scale and the intensity of the devastation that I've seen here, nor have I ever seen one need compounded on another and another and another, to the extent whereby you solve one problem and it's immediately replaced by 25 others. And when you come across the border from the Israeli side, the the comparison is very stark. You have very green, abundant land a few kilometers from here, and here we have children starving. It's very hard to reconcile.